The scent of betrayal smells like jasmine and burnt cedar. Emily would remember that for the rest of her life. The way the air turned sour right before the words left his mouth. The way the flowers woven into her hair suddenly felt too heavy, like a crown of thorns disguised in silk petals. The way the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath as Torin, her childhood sweetheart, her promised mate, the man whose hand she'd held through every moonrise since they were children, looked at her like she was something rotting. The eclipse had started 3 minutes before. No one had predicted it. The sky simply changed, folded in on itself like a curtain being drawn by invisible hands. Silver light poured through the windows of the ceremonial hall, thick and almost liquid, coating everything in an otherworldly glow that made the marble floors look like frozen rivers. The elders had gasped. Someone whispered that the moon goddess was watching. Another voice, shakier, suggested she was warning. Emily had felt it then. The first tremor of wrongness. Not in the sky, but in her chest. In the space between her heartbeats where the mate bond was supposed to be blooming, taking root, anchoring her to Torin forever. Instead, there was only emptiness. A hollow so deep it made her knees weak. Torin's hand had gone cold in hers. She looked up at him, searching his face for reassurance, for love, for anything that resembled the boy who used to braid wildflowers into her hair and promise her eternity. But his eyes were distant, rehearsed, like he'd practiced this moment in a mirror until the humanity drained out of it. And then he'd spoken, for words that shattered her in front of 300 witnesses. I reject this bond. The room had erupted, but Emily heard none of it. The sound crashed over her like a wave, muffled and distorted, as if she'd been dragged underwater. Her wolf, the part of her that had been sleeping quietly her entire life, lurched violently inside her chest. Not in pain, in rage. In something that felt too ancient and too huge to be contained in her small, fragile body. Heat flooded her veins. Her vision blurred, the edges going white-hot and molten, and for a split second, just one heartbeat, she felt her eyes change. Felt them burn. Felt something forbidden and feral rise to the surface like a beast clawing its way out of a grave. The gasps were louder this time. Emily blinked, and the world came rushing back. But it was different now. The faces staring at her were no longer filled with pity or confusion. They were filled with horror. With fear. The kind of primal, bone-deep terror that makes people forget their own names. The high priestess stumbled backward, her ceremonial staff clattering to the ground. One of the elders made a warding gesture with his hand, the same one used to repel dark spirits. A woman in the front row clutched her child closer, as if Emily might lunge at them. Torin had gone pale. Sheet white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because he'd seen it too. The color of her eyes. Deep lunar gold. Not the amber of a common wolf. Not the yellow of a beta. Not even the pale silver of the alpha-born. This was something else. Something that hadn't been seen outside of ancient paintings and crumbling tapestries locked away in the temple's forbidden archives. The lost moon-blessed mate. The woman of prophecy. The one who would either raise the Alpha King to unimaginable power or drag him and the entire kingdom into ruin. Emily's breath came in shallow, broken gasps. She didn't understand what was happening. Didn't understand why her body felt like it was being torn apart and stitched back together with lightning. Didn't understand why Torin was still backing away from her, his hand reaching for the dagger at his belt like she was a threat. She opened her mouth to speak, to beg him to explain, to ask why he was doing this. But before she could make a sound, the grand doors exploded open. Not slowly. Not with ceremony. They slammed inward with such force that the iron hinges screamed, and the wood cracked down the center like a bone snapping in half. The silver light from the eclipse poured through the opening in a blinding flood, so bright it swallowed the room whole. Candles flickered and bent toward the entrance as if bowing. The air itself seemed to shift, to thicken, to bend under the weight of a presence so overwhelming that every wolf in the hall felt their animals tuck tail and lower their heads instinctively. Emily's knees buckled. Not from fear. From recognition. Her wolf surged forward inside her, wild and desperate, and howling in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. It wasn't submission. It was yearning. A pull so violent and consuming that it felt like her soul was trying to claw its way out of her chest and run toward the figure now standing in the doorway. The Alpha King. Emily had never seen him before. Not in person. He didn't attend bonding ceremonies or make public appearances unless the kingdom was on the brink of war. He was a legend. A ghost story. A man whose wolf had never chosen a mate, whose heart was said to be cursed by the same prophecy that haunted his bloodline, whose throne had been fought over and hunted for centuries by enemies both within and beyond the borders. But here he was, tall enough that the doorway barely contained him, broad-shouldered and wrapped in black furs that gleamed like raven feathers under the eclipse light. His face was sharp, carved from stone and shadow, with a jaw that could cut glass and eyes that burned like molten silver. Dark hair fell just past his shoulders, wild and unkempt, as if he'd been running for miles before arriving. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the priests or the elders or the nobles who'd frozen mid-breath, their wine goblets still raised, their mouths hanging open in shock. He looked only at her. And the way he looked at her made Emily forget how to breathe. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't even desire, though there was heat in his gaze that made her skin flush and her pulse stutter. It was recognition. Like he'd been searching for her across lifetimes. Like he'd known her face before she was born. Like every step he'd ever taken had been leading him to this moment, this room, this altar where she stood trembling and broken and burning with a power she didn't understand. The crowd was silent now. Deathly silent. The kind of silence that follows a lightning strike when the air is too charged to even hold sound. The Alpha King moved. Each step was deliberate. Measured. His boots struck the marble floor with a resonance that echoed through the hall like a drumbeat. Wolves shifted involuntarily in the pews, their animals reacting to his dominance, their heads bowing without permission. Even Torin, who was alpha-born and proud, dropped his gaze and took another step back. Emily couldn't move, couldn't think. Her entire world had narrowed to the man walking toward her with the certainty of a god claiming what was always his. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that his scent, pine and smoke, and something wild and untamed wrapped around her like a living thing, close enough that when he spoke, his voice was low and rough, meant only for her even though the entire kingdom would hear it. She was always mine. The words didn't ask. They didn't plead. They claimed. And the bond that Torin had tried to sever, the bond that should have been forming between her and the man who rejected her, snapped into place with someone else entirely. The Alpha King. Emily gasped as the connection slammed into her, brutal and beautiful and so overwhelming she thought it might kill her. It was nothing like the soft, gradual warmth she'd been told to expect. This was wildfire. Chaos. A tether made of starlight and steel that wrapped around her soul and yanked her toward him with a force that defied reason. Her wolf sang. Not in fear. In triumph. Because this was what she'd been waiting for. Not Torin. Not the safe, expected bond her family had arranged. This. Him. The male whose presence made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff with wings she didn't know she had. But before she could speak, before she could even process what was happening, the high priestess found her voice. You cannot claim her. The old woman's words were shaking but firm. The bond was spoken for. The ceremony begun. The laws, the Alpha King interrupted, his eyes never leaving Emily's, do not apply to her. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. She is moon-blessed, he continued, and now his voice rose, filling the hall with an authority that made even the stone walls seem to listen. Marked by the goddess herself. And his gaze finally shifted, landing on Torin with a weight that made the younger man flinch. You tried to bind what was never yours. Torin's face went from pale to gray. I didn't know. You knew enough to fear her. The Alpha King's words were sharp as a blade. Enough to reject her in front of witnesses. Enough to follow orders. Orders. The word hung in the air like poison. Emily's mind spun. Orders? Torin hadn't rejected her out of cruelty or cold feet. Someone had told him to. Someone had wanted this to happen. Wanted her humiliated, broken, exposed. But why? The Alpha King turned back to her, and the fury in his expression softened just enough that she could see something else underneath. Something that looked almost like sorrow. You were never meant for him, Emily. Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. He knew her name. You were hidden. Buried. Kept small so the world wouldn't see what you are. What am I? Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. His hand rose slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might shatter. His fingers brushed her cheek, and where he touched her, warmth bloomed and spread like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The only one who can save us, he said quietly, or destroy us. And then, as if the moon goddess herself wanted to punctuate his words, the eclipse reached totality. The world went black. Somewhere in the darkness, someone screamed. Before we continue, please subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories, and let's walk this path together. The darkness lasted 7 seconds. 7 seconds where Emily couldn't see anything but could feel everything. The panic rising in the hall like floodwater. Bodies moving, stumbling, crashing into pews. Voices calling out for light, for answers, for the goddess to show mercy. The high priestess chanting something ancient and desperate. Guards shouting orders no one could follow. But louder than all of it was the sound of her own heartbeat. Thundering. Erratic. Wild. And beneath it, like a second pulse she'd never noticed before, was his. The Alpha King's heartbeat. She could feel it. Not with her ears, but with something deeper, something that lived in her bones and blood. The bond hummed between them like a taut wire, vibrating with a frequency that made her teeth ache and her skin prickle. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't gentle. It was raw and invasive, and so intimate it felt like he was standing inside her ribcage, watching every breath she took. When the light returned, it came all at once. The eclipse passed as suddenly as it had begun, and silver moonlight flooded back through the shattered doors, illuminating the chaos. People were scattered across the hall, some on their knees, others clutching each other like the world had just tried to swallow them whole. The candles had all gone out. Flower arrangements lay trampled on the floor. Somewhere near the back, a woman was sobbing. But Emily barely registered any of it. Because the Alpha King was still standing in front of her, his hand still on her cheek, and he was looking at her like she was the only solid thing left in a world that had just proven it could vanish without warning. Come with me. His voice was quiet, but absolute. Not a question. Not quite a command. Something in between that made refusal feel impossible. Emily's mouth was dry. I don't even know you. Yes, you do. The certainty in his words should have felt arrogant. Instead, it felt true. Like he was reminding her of something she'd forgotten rather than telling her something new. And that terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. Your Majesty. The High Priestess had recovered enough to approach, though she kept a careful distance, her age-spotted hands trembling as she clutched her staff. You cannot simply take her. There are protocols. The family must be consulted. The council must convene. The laws of bonding were written before she existed. The Alpha King didn't turn to face the old woman. Didn't take his eyes off Emily. But his voice carried enough authority to make the priestess fall silent mid-sentence. The moment her eyes changed, every protocol became obsolete. You know this. Your ancestors wrote it in the texts you keep locked away because you hoped you'd never have to face it. A muscle twitched in the priestess's jaw. She knew he was right. They all did. Emily could see it in the way the elders exchanged glances, in the way her parents, standing frozen near the front row, her mother's face streaked with tears, didn't rush forward to protect her. They were afraid. Not of him. Of her. The realization hit like a fist to the stomach. Her own parents looked at her like she was a stranger. Like the girl they'd raised had been replaced by something dangerous the moment that forbidden gold had flared in her eyes. Her father's hand rested on her mother's shoulder, holding her back, keeping her away from their own daughter. Emily felt something crack inside her chest. Something that had already been fractured by Torin's rejection, but had still been clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, would fight for her. Would tell this powerful, terrifying man that he couldn't just claim her like property. Would demand answers or explanations, or at least pretend that her life, her choices, her voice mattered. But no one spoke. No one moved. They were going to let him take her. The Alpha King must have felt the shift in her emotions through the bond, because his expression softened just slightly. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible coming from a man who radiated danger like heat from a forge. "I know you're afraid." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her even though the hall had gone quiet enough that a whisper would carry. "I know this feels like another betrayal. Another choice being stolen from you." He paused, and something that looked almost like pain flickered across his features. "But if you stay here, they will kill you." The words were so blunt, so matter-of-fact, that for a moment Emily thought she'd misheard. "What?" "Not tonight." His jaw tightened. "Maybe not even this month. But your eyes have marked you, Emily. Every wolf in this room saw what you are. And fear makes people do terrible things to what they don't understand." His gaze finally shifted, sweeping across the assembled crowd with an intensity that made several people flinch. "How many of them do you think are already wondering if killing you would prevent the prophecy? How many are calculating whether your death is worth the risk of my wrath?" Emily's blood went cold. She wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that these people had known her since she was a child, that they wouldn't hurt her, that he was wrong. But when she looked out at the faces staring back at her, she saw no love. No loyalty. Only calculation. Terror. The kind of desperate self-preservation that erases empathy and makes monsters out of ordinary people. Torin wouldn't meet her eyes. Her childhood friend Mira had moved 3 rows back, putting distance between them. Even the baker who used to sneak her honey cakes was gripping his wife's hand so tightly his knuckles had gone white, his expression twisted with something that looked horribly like relief that he wasn't the one marked. The Alpha King was right. She wasn't safe here. Maybe she never had been. Why do you care? The question escaped before she could stop it, sharp and wounded and desperate. "You don't know me. You said I was always yours, but that's impossible. We've never even met. So why?" "Because my wolf recognized yours before you were born." He said it simply, like he was stating a fact as obvious as the color of the sky. "Because I've been searching for you for 10 years, following rumors and prophecies and half-remembered dreams. Because the curse on my bloodline can only be broken by the one woman the moon goddess marked as my equal." His hand dropped from her face, but he didn't step back. Didn't give her space to retreat. "And because if I don't protect you, Emily, no one else will." The truth of it sat heavy in the air between them. She had a choice. Stay here, in the wreckage of the life she'd thought was hers, surrounded by people who would smile at her in daylight and plot her death by dark. Or go with a man she didn't know, whose very presence made her wolf sing and her heart race, whose motives she couldn't trust even if his words rang with sincerity. Some choice. Behind the Alpha King, movement caught her eye. His guards, she hadn't even noticed them before, stood just inside the doorway. 6 of them, all radiating the same lethal competence as their king. But it was the one on the far left who made her breath catch. A woman. Tall and lean, with silver hair braided back from a face marked with scars that spoke of survival. She was watching Emily with an expression that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't cruelty either. Something closer to understanding. Like she'd stood exactly where Emily was standing now and knew precisely how it felt to have your entire world collapse in a single night. The woman gave her a small nod. Emily didn't know what it meant. Didn't know if it was reassurance or warning or simple acknowledgement. But something about it steadied the shaking in her hands. She looked back at the Alpha King. At George. Because if she was going to trust him with her life, and it seemed she was, because what other option did she have, she should at least think of him as something more than a title. If I go with you, she said slowly, each word carefully chosen, I want answers. Real ones. Not riddles or prophecies or mystical nonsense. I want to know what I am. Why my family hid it. What the curse on your bloodline has to do with me. She lifted her chin, trying to find some scrap of the girl she'd been this morning. The one who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. And I want your word that you won't hurt me. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. I can promise you answers, he said. I can promise you protection and resources and every comfort my kingdom can provide. He hesitated, and for the first time since he'd walked into the hall, he looked uncertain. Vulnerable. But I can't promise I won't hurt you, Emily. Because the bond between us, the one that just snapped into place, it's going to demand things from both of us. Things that will be painful and complicated and possibly destructive. His voice roughened. I can promise I'll try. That I'll fight like hell to keep you safe, even for myself. But I've lived too long and seen too much to make promises I'm not certain I can keep. It was the honesty that decided her. A kinder man would have lied, would have told her everything would be fine, that she could trust him absolutely, that he'd never let anything hurt her. Would have said whatever it took to get her to comply. But George gave her the truth, even when it was ugly. Even when it might make her refuse him. That had to count for something. Okay. The word came out steadier than she felt. I'll go with you. Relief washed across his features so quickly she almost missed it. He nodded once, then turned to address the hall, his voice ringing out with royal authority. Emily is under my protection as of this moment. Any attempt to harm her will be considered an act of war against the crown. His gaze landed on Torrin, who looked like he might be sick. The bonding contract between her and Torrin of House Merrick is void. She will not be returning to this territory. Her mother made a small, wounded sound. Emily forced herself not to look. If she looked, if she saw her mother crying, she might break. Might run back to the woman who'd raised her and beg for an explanation, for comfort, for anything that felt like love. But George's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own, and the bond pulsed between them like a heartbeat. Steady. Strong. Real. He led her toward the door, his guards falling into formation around them. The crowd parted like water, everyone pressing back to avoid even the possibility of touching her. As if her very presence was contagious. Cursed. They were almost to the doorway when a voice cut through the silence. Wait. It was her father. Emily stopped, her body responding before her mind could catch up. She turned, hope flaring bright and foolish in her chest. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe he would explain. Maybe. The necklace. Her father's voice was cold. Formal. The tone he used with merchants and strangers. The silver pendant she's wearing. It belongs to our family. It should stay with us. The hope died. He wasn't asking her to stay. Wasn't trying to protect her or fight for her or even say goodbye. He wanted his property back. Emily's hand moved to her throat, touching the delicate chain she'd worn since childhood. The pendant was small, unremarkable. A simple crescent moon stamped into tarnished silver. She'd always assumed it was sentimental. A family heirloom passed down through generations. Now she wondered what else it was. What else they'd hidden from her. Before she could respond, George's hand closed over hers, pressing her palm and the pendant flat against her collarbone. No. His voice was quiet, but absolute. It was hers the moment you put it on her. You don't get to take anything else from her tonight. Her father's face flushed with anger, but he didn't argue. Didn't push. because challenging the Alpha King over a piece of jewelry would be suicide, and everyone in the room knew it. George's fingers squeezed hers gently. They walked out together. The cold hit her first. Outside the ceremonial hall, the night air was sharp and bitter, carrying the smell of pine and approaching winter. Emily's wedding dress, delicate lace and silk that had taken 3 seamstresses 2 months to complete, offered no protection against the wind. She shivered, and immediately one of the guards stepped forward, draping a heavy fur cloak over her shoulders. It smelled like leather and smoke. Like George. The Bond recognized it before her conscious mind did, and her wolf pressed close to the surface, settling into the scent like it was home. Emily pulled the cloak tighter, hating how much comfort it provided. Carriages waited in the courtyard, black and sleek, marked with the royal seal, a wolf's head crowned in silver thorns. George guided her toward the largest one, his hand never leaving the small of her back. The touch burned through the thin fabric of her dress, a constant reminder of the connection thrumming between them. She climbed inside, grateful for the privacy the enclosed space provided, grateful that no one could see the tears building behind her eyes or the way her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep them still. George entered after her, settling onto the seat opposite. The door closed. A moment later, the carriage lurched into motion. Silence stretched between them. Emily stared out the window, watching the only home she'd ever known disappear into the darkness. The ceremonial hall grew smaller, then vanished entirely as they rounded the bend. The village lights flickered like dying stars. The forest swallowed them whole. She was leaving. Everything. Everyone. The life she'd planned, the future she'd imagined, the girl she'd thought she was, all of it was gone. Destroyed in less than an hour by forces she didn't understand and powers she'd never asked for. You're wondering if you made the right choice. George's voice startled her. He'd been so quiet she'd almost forgotten he was there. She didn't answer. Didn't trust her voice not to break. You didn't, he continued, and her head snapped toward him. He was leaning back against the seat, his expression unreadable in the shadows. There was no right choice, Emily. Only survival. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to be the truth. He shifted, and moonlight caught his face, highlighting the sharp angles and the weariness that lived in his eyes. Comfort is a luxury neither of us can afford right now. Emily laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. You keep talking about prophecies and curses and how I'm dangerous, but no one has actually explained what any of that means. What am I, George? What did those people see in my eyes that made them look at me like I was a monster? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped between them. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer. Like he was sharing a secret that cost him something to tell. 300 years ago, the moon goddess made a bargain with the first Alpha King. She would bless his bloodline with power beyond measure, strength, longevity, the ability to unite all wolf packs under one banner. In exchange, he would protect her sacred sites and honor her laws. He paused. But the fifth king broke the bargain. He grew greedy, began conquering territories that were meant to remain wild, destroyed a temple to build a fortress, ignored the warnings until the goddess had no choice but to act. Emily's throat tightened. She knew this story. Every wolf did. It was taught to children as a cautionary tale about hubris and divine punishment. She cursed his line, she whispered. George nodded. Every Alpha King since has been born incomplete. Our wolves are powerful but unstable. We can't hold the throne past our 40th year without losing ourselves to madness. And we can't produce heirs. The bond never forms, never settles. The bloodline was supposed to die out. His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. But the goddess isn't cruel without purpose. She left a door open. A single chance for redemption. The moon-blessed mate. Yes. He said it like a prayer. Like a death sentence. A woman marked by the goddess herself. born once every 3 centuries with the power to either break the curse or complete it, to save the bloodline or end it forever. His jaw tightened. Your eyes, Emily, that gold, it's the mark. The sign that you're the one. The only one who can anchor my wolf and stabilize the bond enough to break what's been broken for generations. The words sat heavy in the small space. Emily's mind raced, trying to process it all. Trying to understand how her boring, ordinary life had somehow been a lie big enough to involve ancient curses and divine intervention. But I'm nobody, she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. I'm not special. I've never even shifted properly. My wolf is weak and quiet, and nothing like what you're describing. There has to be a mistake. There's no mistake. George's certainty was absolute. Your wolf is quiet because it's been suppressed. That necklace you're wearing, the one your father wanted back, it's not just silver. It's laced with moonsbane. Just enough to dampen your abilities without killing you. Just enough to keep you small and unnoticed and safe. Emily's hand flew to her throat, touching the pendant with horror. They poisoned me? They protected you, he corrected, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely agree with the method. If you'd manifested your power as a child, before you were old enough to control it, you would have been hunted. Killed. There are factions, both within the kingdom and outside it, that believe the moon-blessed mate is too dangerous to exist. That the risk of her power falling into the wrong hands outweighs the possibility of breaking the curse. He reached out slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a wild animal. His fingers brushed hers where they clutched the pendant. Your family kept you hidden. Kept you weak. It was the only way to ensure you'd survive long enough to become what you were meant to be. And what's that? Bitterness crept into her voice. Your solution? Your key to breaking a curse I had nothing to do with. Pain flickered across his expression. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to bind my fate to someone who didn't choose me? Who was forced into this by powers neither of us control? He pulled back, his hand falling away. I've been searching for you for a decade, Emily. Following prophecies and chasing rumors across territories most wolves wouldn't dare enter. Not because I wanted a mate, but because without you, I have 5 years left before the madness takes hold. 5 years before I become the monster my ancestors were and have to be put down like a rabid dog. The rawness in his voice made her chest ache. She hadn't thought about what this meant for him. Hadn't considered that he might be as trapped as she was. That the bond snapping into place wasn't some romantic fairy tale, but a desperate gamble for survival. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't. I wasn't thinking. You have nothing to apologize for. He leaned back again, exhaustion settling over him like a shroud. This isn't your fault. None of it is. But it felt like it was. Emily turned back to the window, watching the dark forest blur past. Her mind drifted, slipping away from the impossible present and into the past. Into memories she'd been trying not to examine too closely because they hurt too much. She'd always been different. Not in obvious ways. Not in ways that drew attention. But in small, subtle things that she'd learned to hide. The way her senses were sharper than other children's. How she could hear conversations from 3 rooms away or smell rain coming hours before the sky darkened. The way animals would approach her without fear, like they recognized something in her that was more wild than human. Her parents had discouraged it. Told her not to listen so closely. Not to wander into the forest alone. Not to speak to the crows that gathered on her windowsill or the foxes that followed her through the meadow. She'd thought they were being protective. Cautious. Now she understood they'd been terrified. And Torin. God's Torin. She'd loved him. Or thought she had. It was hard to tell the difference now, with the bond to George burning bright and insistent in her chest, making every memory of her almost husband feel faded and distant. Like a dream she was forgetting upon waking. But she remembered the way he'd pulled away over the past few months. How his kisses had grown perfunctory, his touches hesitant. How he'd stopped looking at her directly, as if meeting her eyes might reveal something he wasn't ready to face. He'd known. Maybe not exactly what she was, but he'd known something was wrong. Something was different. And instead of asking her, instead of trusting her, he let someone convince him that rejection was the safer choice. The memory of his face at the altar, that practiced coldness, that rehearsed cruelty, burned like acid. He was paid. George's voice cut through her thoughts. Emily looked at him sharply. What? Torin. His family received a substantial sum 3 months ago. Enough to clear their debts and purchase the land they've been trying to acquire for years. His expression was grim. Someone wanted you publicly rejected and humiliated. Wanted you broken and vulnerable right as your power awakened. The betrayal was a living thing, clawing its way up her throat. Who? I don't know yet. Frustration edged his words. But I will find out. And when I do, he stopped himself, jaw clenching. When I do, they'll answer for it. Emily believed him. The certainty in his voice, the barely contained violence simmering beneath his control, it should have frightened her. Should have made her question whether she'd traded one cage for another. But instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt since the moment Torin opened his mouth to reject her. Protected. Not safe. Safety was an illusion, and she was learning that lesson with brutal efficiency tonight. But protected. Like someone was finally on her side. Finally willing to fight for her instead of treating her like a problem to be managed or a threat to be contained. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady. Her wolf, quiet for so long she'd thought it might be broken, stirred. Not with fear or confusion. With interest. With a bone-deep certainty that the male sitting across from her was hers in ways that had nothing to do with prophecies or curses or divine intervention. He was hers because her wolf had chosen him. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Emily took a shaky breath, her fingers still wrapped around the pendant at her throat. The pendant that had been slowly poisoning her for years under the guise of protection. This necklace, she said slowly. If I take it off, your power will wake fully. George's eyes were steady on hers. It won't be immediate. Your wolf has been suppressed too long for that. But over the next few days, you'll start to feel it. Your senses will sharpen. Your strength will increase. And the abilities that make you moon-blessed will begin to surface. What abilities? He hesitated. I don't know all of them. The texts are incomplete, and the last moon-blessed mate lived 300 years ago. But the prophecies mention silver flame, the ability to heal or harm with a touch. A connection to the moon itself that allows you to draw power directly from her light. He paused. And the ability to anchor an alpha's wolf. To calm the madness and stabilize the bond in ways that make us more, stronger, faster, powerful enough to unite the territories and end the wars that have been bleeding us dry for decades. His voice dropped. Powerful enough to be a threat to anyone who benefits from keeping the packs divided and weak. Which explained why someone had wanted her broken. If she was too traumatized, too shattered by rejection and public humiliation, she'd be easier to control. Easier to kill. Easier to ensure she never became the force that could shift the balance of power. They'd underestimated her. Or maybe they'd underestimated him. George, who'd crashed through the doors of her bonding ceremony and claimed her in front of 300 witnesses. Who'd faced down priests and elders and the weight of tradition without flinching. Who looked at her not like she was a monster or a solution, but like she was a person worth saving. I want it off, Emily said suddenly. Her hands moved to the clasp at the back of her neck. The necklace. I want it off now, Emily. No. Her voice was firm, stronger than she'd heard it all night. I'm tired of being kept small. Tired of being lied to and hidden and treated like I'm too fragile or too dangerous to be trusted with the truth about myself. The clasp resisted and frustration flared hot in her chest. Help me. George studied her for a long moment. Then he moved, shifting from his seat to kneel on the carriage floor in front of her. The space was too small, too intimate. His knees bracketed hers, and she could feel the heat of him even through layers of fabric. Once it's off, he said quietly, there's no going back. Your life will never be simple again. It was never simple, she countered. It was just a lie I was too blind to see through. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Fair enough. He reached up, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he found the clasp. The touch sent sparks racing down her spine, the bond singing between them. She held her breath, acutely aware of every point of contact, his knees against hers, his fingers on her skin, his breath warm against her cheek. The necklace fell away. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then power slammed into her like a wave breaking against rocks. Her gasp was sharp and involuntary as sensation flooded her system. The world suddenly snapped into hyperfocus. She could hear everything, the horses' hooves striking the ground, the guards breathing, the night birds calling in the forest, George's heartbeat matching rhythm with her own. She could smell the earth and the approaching rain and the specific scent of each person in their traveling party. And the bond. Oh gods, the bond. It had been a thread before, a gentle pull. Now it was a rope. A chain. A connection so visceral and consuming that she couldn't tell where she ended and George began. She felt his surprise, his satisfaction, his desire. Felt the wolf inside him surge forward, pressing against the cage of his control. Her own wolf answered. Rose up from the depths where it had been sleeping, stretched and roared. Not with sound. With power. Silver light burst from Emily's skin, flooding the carriage, pouring through the windows like liquid moonlight. She heard shouts from outside, felt the horses spook, felt the world itself seem to pause and take notice. And through it all, George held her. His hands on her shoulders, grounding her, anchoring her to reality as power she'd never imagined crashed through her in waves. His voice in her ear, low and steady, talking her through it even though she couldn't make out the words over the roaring in her head. His wolf, pressing close to hers, showing her she wasn't alone. Gradually, slowly, the light began to fade. The power settled into her bones instead of bursting out of her skin. Her breathing evened out. The world came back into focus. Emily found herself slumped against George's chest, his arms wrapped around her, holding her together while she fell apart and rebuilt herself into something new. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. You're safe. I've got you. And for the first time in a night full of impossible things, Emily let herself believe it. They traveled through the night. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, her body exhausted from the awakening, but her mind too wired to fully rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the power humming beneath her skin like electricity, waiting, watching, ready to surge forward again at the slightest provocation. George had moved to sit beside her after the light faded, keeping one arm around her shoulders while she trembled through the aftershocks. He didn't speak much. Didn't offer empty reassurances or try to explain what had happened. He simply held her, steady and solid, while her entire understanding of herself rewrote itself in real time. The bond between them had changed too. It wasn't just a connection anymore. It was a conversation. A constant exchange of sensation and emotion that she didn't know how to control. She felt his concern like warm honey in her chest. Felt his wolf pacing restlessly, agitated by her distress, but unable to do anything except stay close. Felt his exhaustion, bone deep and ancient, the weight of years spent searching and fighting and holding himself together against a curse that wanted to tear him apart. It was too much. Too intimate. Like someone had peeled back her skin and his and pressed the raw parts together until they fused. But when she tried to pull away, to put distance between them, her wolf whined in protest and the bond tightened like a fist around her heart. So she stopped fighting it. Stopped trying to make sense of it. Just let herself exist in this strange new reality where she could feel someone else's heartbeat as clearly as her own. Dawn was breaking when the carriage finally stopped. Emily stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. Through the window, she could see they'd left the forest behind. The landscape had transformed into something older, wilder. Massive standing stones rose from the earth like broken teeth, arranged in a circle that hummed with power even from a distance. Moss and vines covered their surfaces, but underneath she could see markings. Symbols carved so deep into the rock they'd survived centuries of weather and neglect. Her breath caught. What is this place? George's arm tightened around her shoulders briefly before he released her and reached for the door. The Temple of First Moonrise. One of the original sacred sites the moon goddess blessed when she first made her bargain with the wolf clans. He stepped out, then turned back to offer his hand. It's also the only place left where the old magic still works, where we can get answers about what you are and what comes next. Emily took his hand, letting him help her down from the carriage. The moment her feet touched the ground, the earth seemed to shiver. Power rose up through the soil, through her boots, racing up her legs and spine like recognition. Like the land itself was welcoming her home. Her wolf surged forward, alert and eager. The standing stones were even more impressive up close. Each one was at least 20 feet tall and covered in intricate carvings that seemed to move in the corner of her vision. Wolves running. Moons in various phases. Women with their hands raised to the sky, silver light pouring from their palms. And threading through it all, a pattern that repeated over and over, a pair of eyes rendered in perfect detail, blazing with the same lunar gold that now lived in Emily's gaze. These are... She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find words adequate to describe the awe and terror warring in her chest. Moon-blessed mates. The voice came from behind them. Emily turned to find the silver-haired woman from the guard detail approaching, her scarred face solemn. Every woman who's carried the mark. Their stories are recorded here. Emily's throat tightened. How many? 14. The woman stopped a few feet away, her eyes moving over the stones with something that looked like reverence. Across 3,000 years. You're the 15th. 15 women. 15 lives compressed into stone and symbol. 15 stories that ended. How? The question must have shown on her face because the woman's expression softened just slightly. Not all of them died tragic deaths, if that's what you're wondering. 3 broke the curse and lived long lives with their mates. 5 were killed before they could complete the bond. 4 went mad from the power and had to be contained. And 2. She hesitated. 2 chose to reject the bond and walk away. The curse continued, and they lived out their days in isolation, neither fully human nor fully wolf. The numbers sat heavy in the morning air. 3 successes out of 14. Not exactly encouraging odds. George's hand found the small of Emily's back, a gentle pressure that might have been reassurance or simply acknowledgement. Astrid served the last moon-blessed mate. She's one of the few still alive who remembers what the awakening looks like. Emily studied the woman, Astrid, with new eyes. She had to be at least 70, though she moved like someone decades younger. The scars on her face extended down her neck and disappeared beneath her armor. Battle scars. The kind earned protecting something precious. What happened to her? Emily asked quietly. The woman you served. Pain flickered across Astrid's features. She was murdered 3 days before the bond could be completed. Poisoned by a faction that believed the Alpha King becoming that powerful would upset the balance of the territories. Her jaw tightened. I was supposed to protect her. I failed. The guilt in her voice was a living thing. George's hand pressed more firmly against Emily's back. Astrid has spent the last 30 years hunting down everyone involved in that conspiracy. She won't fail again. It should have been comforting. Instead, it was just another reminder of how many people wanted her dead. How many would see her existence as a threat too dangerous to tolerate. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the rising sun. Why did you bring me here? What are we looking for? Answers. George gestured toward the center of the stone circle. The temple holds records. Prophecies. Instructions left by the goddess herself for the moon-blessed mates who would come after. If we're going to survive what's coming, we need to know what you're fully capable of and how to control it. Which meant confronting exactly what she was. No more hiding. No more pretending. No more necklaces laced with poison to keep her small and safe and ignorant. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold of the stone circle, the world changed. Sound muted, as if someone had draped a blanket over reality. The air thickened, becoming almost liquid, pressing against her skin with gentle insistence. And the light, the early morning sunlight, transformed into something silver and ethereal, the same quality as the eclipse that had marked her awakening. She heard George call her name, but his voice sounded distant, muffled. Her feet carried her forward without conscious direction, drawn toward the center of the circle where a flat stone altar rose from the earth. Its surface was polished smooth, black as midnight, reflecting the sky above in perfect detail. Emily's hands moved of their own accord, palms pressing flat against the cold stone. Power detonated. Not outward this time, but inward. Flooding her mind with images and sensations that weren't hers, memories that belonged to the stone and the earth and the bones of the world itself. She saw women. 14 of them, each one appearing in rapid succession like pages flipping in a book. Some were tall, some small. Different ages, different backgrounds, different centuries. But all of them had the same eyes. That impossible lunar gold that marked them as chosen. She watched them live. Watched them love. Watched them fight and bleed and burn with power that made the earth tremble. She watched 3 of them succeed. Saw them complete the bond with their alpha kings, saw silver light explode across entire kingdoms as the curse shattered like glass. Saw them stand together, powerful and united, their combined strength forging peace from centuries of war. She watched 5 of them die. Knives in the dark. Poison in their cups. Arrows through their hearts. Betrayals from people they trusted, deaths that came swift and brutal because their enemies knew hesitation meant failure. She watched 4 of them break. Saw the power consume them from the inside out, burning through their sanity until there was nothing left but raw, destructive force wearing a human face. Saw them contained in silver cages, screaming prophecies and warnings no one could understand, their minds fractured beyond repair. And she watched 2 of them walk away. Saw them reject the bond, reject the destiny, reject everything the goddess had planned for them. Saw them choose isolation over risk, saw them live long, quiet lives alone while the curse continued its slow destruction of the bloodline they'd refused to save. Every choice. Every consequence. Every possible future laid out in brutal clarity. Emily's knees buckled. Hands caught her before she hit the ground. George's hands, strong and sure, pulling her back against his chest. The contact broke the vision, snapped her back into her own mind, her own body. She gasped for air like she'd been drowning, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might explode. "What did you see?" George's voice was rough with concern, his arms locked around her waist. She couldn't answer. Couldn't find words to describe the weight of those 14 lives, 14 fates, 14 warnings about what happened when you carried power you didn't ask for and destiny you didn't choose. Instead, she turned in his arms and buried her face against his chest, letting the solid reality of him anchor her while the vision slowly faded. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear. His scent, pine and smoke, and something uniquely him, wrapped around her like a shield. The bond pulsed between them, warm and insistent, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this. That whatever came next, whatever impossible choices lay ahead, she wouldn't face them as those other women had. She had him. And maybe that would be enough to tip the odds in their favor. "I saw them," she finally whispered against his chest. "All of them. The moon-blessed mates who came before me. I saw how their stories ended." George's arms tightened. And I'm terrified that mine will end the same way." He pulled back just enough to tilt her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. Silver gray, intense, burning with something that looked like determination and desperation in equal measure. "It won't," he said, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. because they faced this alone, or with mates who didn't understand what they were dealing with, or with kingdoms that saw them as tools instead of people. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. You have me, Emily. And I have spent a decade preparing for this moment, studying every scrap of history, every fragment of prophecy, building alliances with people who believe in what we could become together. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. I won't let you break. I won't let them kill you. And I sure as hell won't let you walk away. It should have sounded possessive, controlling, but instead, it sounded like a promise, like a vow. Like he was offering her something those other women had never had, a true partner instead of just a destiny. How do you know? Her voice cracked. How can you be so sure? Because my wolf chose you. He said it simply, like it explained everything. And my wolf has kept me alive through things that should have destroyed me 100 times over. If it chose you, if it recognized you as ours, then you're strong enough to survive this. We both are. Emily wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust in the bond and the prophecy and the idea that maybe, just maybe, she could be the one who beat the odds. But doubt was a poison that had already taken root. She'd spent her entire life being told she was ordinary, unremarkable, safe and simple and nothing special. And now she was supposed to believe she was powerful enough to break a 300-year-old curse? Important enough that people would kill to stop her? Strong enough to control abilities that had driven other women mad? It felt impossible. Like trying to convince herself she could fly by simply believing hard enough. Movement at the edge of the stone circle caught her attention. Astrid had approached, carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. The older woman's expression was carefully neutral, but Emily could see the weight of old grief in her eyes. The altar has accepted her, Astrid said, addressing George. Which means the temple's inner sanctum will open. If you're going to access the prophecies, now is the time. George nodded, but he didn't release Emily. Can you stand? She tested her legs, found them shaky but functional. I think so. He helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her waist until he was certain she wouldn't collapse. Then he turned to Astrid, who held out the cloth-wrapped bundle. What is it? Emily asked. Insurance. Astrid pulled back the cloth to reveal a dagger. But not just any blade, this one seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it, its edge sharp enough that looking at it too long made Emily's eyes water. Strange markings covered the hilt, the same symbols she'd seen on the standing stones. Forged from moon silver and blessed by the temple priests. One of the few weapons that can actually kill someone with your level of power if things go wrong. The implication hung heavy in the air. If Emily lost control, if the power consumed her, if she became a threat instead of a solution, this blade could end it, could end her. George took the dagger without hesitation, tucking it into his belt. His face was expressionless, but through the bond, Emily felt the wave of emotion, revulsion, determination, grief. He hated carrying it, hated that it might be necessary. But he took it anyway because that's what survival demanded. Practical. Brutal. Honest. Just like everything else about him. The sanctum is through there. Astrid pointed to a gap between two of the largest standing stones. From this angle, Emily could see steps leading down into darkness, the entrance so narrow she'd have to turn sideways to fit through. I'll keep watch out here. Make sure you're not disturbed. Which meant whatever lay below was meant for Emily and George alone. Perfect. Because apparently she hadn't been terrified enough yet. George's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Ready? No. Not even close. But she nodded anyway because what else could she do? They descended together into the dark. The stairs went down much farther than should have been possible. Emily counted 73 steps before losing track, each one carved from the same black stone as the altar above. The walls pressed close on either side, rough rock that wept moisture and smelled like earth and age. No torches lit the way. No moonlight penetrated this deep. But somehow she could see. Silver light emanated from her skin, soft and steady, casting just enough illumination to navigate by. George noticed it too, She felt his surprise pulse through the bond, but he didn't comment. Just kept his hand locked with hers and matched her pace step for step. The temperature dropped the deeper they went. By the time they reached the bottom, Emily's breath was misting in the air and her wedding dress, gods, she was still wearing her wedding dress, offered about as much protection as tissue paper. She shivered, and immediately George's warmth wrapped around her from behind, his arms encircling her waist. Just a little farther, he murmured against her ear. The tunnel opened into a chamber. Not large. Maybe 30 feet across, with a ceiling so low George had to duck slightly. But every inch of available space was covered in writing. Symbols and script in languages Emily didn't recognize spiraled across the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Some glowed faintly in response to her light. Others remained dark, dormant, waiting. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it rested a book. No, not a book. A tome. Massive and ancient, bound in what looked like leather, but felt wrong somehow when Emily approached and reached out to touch it. Too smooth. Too cold. Like touching stone that remembered being alive. The Codex of Moonborn. George's voice was reverent. It's supposed to contain every prophecy the goddess ever spoke about the moonblessed mates. Instructions for awakening their power. Warnings about what could go wrong. He moved to stand beside her, staring down at the tome like it might bite. I've spent years trying to find it. The temple guardians claimed it was lost centuries ago. It was waiting, Emily whispered. The knowledge came from somewhere deep inside her, the same instinctive understanding that had guided her to the altar. Waiting for someone with the mark to come and claim it. Her hands moved without conscious thought, opening the cover. The pages inside weren't paper. They were something else. Something that shifted between solid and liquid, text appearing and disappearing like thoughts becoming real and then fading again. Emily's eyes tracked across words that rearranged themselves as she read, the language transforming from ancient script into something she could understand. To the 15th born. You who read these words have survived your awakening. You have felt the power rise and chosen not to let it consume you. This is the first test, and you have passed. But know this, the path ahead will demand far more than survival. Your power is not a gift. It is a weapon. One that can save or destroy with equal ease. Those who fear you will try to take it before you learn to wield it. Those who would use you will try to control it before you understand its true nature. And those who love you will be caught in the crossfire of forces that care nothing for mortal hearts. The Alpha King you have bonded will be both your greatest strength and your deepest vulnerability. His curse and your power are two halves of a whole that was sundered when the bargain broke. To restore it, you must do more than simply exist together. You must choose each other. Not once, but every day. In every moment. Against every obstacle. The bond will be tested. Your enemies will come. And before the curse can break, one of you must be willing to die for the other. Truly die, not in metaphor or symbol, so that the goddess knows your commitment is absolute. Only then will the new bargain be sealed. Only then will the bloodline be saved. But beware, the sacrifice must be willing. Coerced death voids the bond and completes the curse. Choose wisely. Choose truly. And may the moon light your path through the darkness ahead. The words stopped. Emily stared at the page, her heart hammering against her ribs. One of them had to die. That was the price. The final cost of breaking a curse 300 years in the making. Not just a bonding ceremony or a declaration of love or even the awakening of her power. Actual death. Willing. True. Permanent. No. George's voice was sharp as breaking glass. He'd been reading over her shoulder, and now he spun her around to face him, his hands gripping her shoulders hard enough to bruise. Absolutely not. We'll find another way. The goddess herself wrote this. I don't care. His eyes blazed silver, his wolf rising to the surface. I didn't spend 10 years searching for you just to watch you die. There has to be another answer. Another loophole. Something the Codex isn't telling us. Emily's throat tightened. And if there isn't? Then the curse continues. He said it like it was simple. Like throwing away their only chance at breaking the bond meant nothing compared to keeping her alive. I'll take the madness when it comes. I'll prepare the kingdom for a successor. But I will not ask you to die for me, Emily. I won't. The devotion in his voice broke something in her chest. He barely knew her. They'd been bonded for less than 12 hours. And yet he was ready to sacrifice everything, his throne, his sanity, his life, rather than risk hers. It should have been romantic. Instead, it was terrifying. Because Emily could feel the truth of his words through the bond. Could feel his absolute certainty that her life was worth more than the curse being broken. Worth more than the peace his full power could bring. Worth more than anything. And that kind of devotion was dangerous. The kind that made people do stupid, reckless things that got everyone killed. Before she could argue, before she could try to make him see reason, sound erupted from above. Shouting. Metal on metal. The unmistakable clash of battle. George's head snapped up, his entire body going taut. Through the bond, Emily felt his wolf snarl and lunge against his control. We need to move. Now. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stairs, but they'd barely made it 3 steps when figures appeared at the top of the tunnel. Not Astrid. Not their guards. 5 wolves in fighting form, half-shifted, that dangerous in-between state where they kept human intelligence, but gained animal strength and claws. Their eyes glowed in the darkness. Their lips pulled back from 2 long fangs. And they were blocking the only exit. George moved in front of Emily instantly, his body a wall between her and the threat. Who sent you? The largest of the wolves, a man with gray-streaked fur and scars crossing his muzzle, laughed. It came out distorted, wrong, more growl than actual sound. Does it matter? Every major house wants her dead. We're just the ones who got here first. You'll have to go through me. We're counting on it. The gray wolf's grin widened. Kill the king. Destroy the mate. Collect payment and retire rich. Seems simple enough. George's growl made the walls shake. Emily felt his power rise, felt his wolf demand to be released, felt the battle readiness that came from centuries of alphas who'd survived by being faster, stronger, and more brutal than anyone who challenged them. But there were 5 of them and only one of him. And she was here. A liability. A weakness he'd have to protect while fighting for both their lives. The gray wolf saw the calculation on George's face and laughed again. That's right, Your Majesty. Can't fight properly when you're worried about your pretty mate getting hurt. Makes our job so much easier. Rage flooded through the bond, George's rage at being right, at being trapped, at having his greatest strength turned into his most vulnerable point. The attackers moved. Fast. Coordinated. 2 came at George head-on while the other 3 split off, trying to flank and get to Emily. George met the first 2 with devastating efficiency. His shift was instant and controlled, full wolf, massive and black as midnight, with the silver eyes of the alpha bloodline blazing like stars. He caught one attacker by the throat mid-lunge and used the momentum to slam him into the second. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed. But the other 3 were still coming. Still closing in on Emily with claws extended and murder in their eyes. Terror locked her muscles. She'd never fought. Never trained. Never even shifted properly until tonight, and that had been involuntary, our response to the necklace being removed. She didn't know how to defend herself. Didn't know how to access the power supposedly sleeping inside her. She was going to die. They were going to tear her apart while George was distracted, and he'd have to watch, and the bond would make him feel every second of her pain. The first wolf lunged. Emily threw her hands up instinctively, a useless gesture of protection. Silver flame exploded from her palms. Not light, not power. Actual fire. White-hot and blazing, it slammed into the attacking wolf like a physical force and sent him flying backward. He hit the wall with a sickening crunch and didn't get up. The other 2 skidded to a halt, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Emily stared at her hands. They were glowing. actually glowing, wrapped in flames that didn't burn her but radiated enough heat that the air around her shimmered. Her wolf was awake now, fully present, snarling and ready. And beneath her fear, beneath her panic, something else was rising. Anger. These males had come here to kill her, to destroy the bond, to murder George and collect payment like this was just business. Like their lives meant nothing. Her vision went white at the edges. The flame spread, racing up her arms, across her shoulders, engulfing her entire body in silver fire that lit the chamber bright as daylight. The two remaining wolves turned and ran. Smart. Emily took a step forward, and the flames responded to her will, reaching out like living things, hungry and eager. Part of her, the rational part that still remembered being the girl who'd woken up this morning expecting to get married, screamed at her to stop, to pull back, to not become the monster they already feared. But the larger part, the part that had been suppressed and hidden and poisoned for 23 years, wanted blood. George's howl cut through the haze. The sound was sharp and commanding, cutting straight through her rage and yanking her attention back to the present. She turned to find him standing over 3 dead wolves, his muzzle stained red, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her chest ache. Not fear, not horror at what she'd become. Pride. And something else. Something that looked almost like relief. The flames flickered and died. Emily collapsed to her knees, every ounce of strength draining out of her like someone had pulled a plug. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She'd just killed someone. Just set them on fire with power she didn't understand and watched them burn. She'd just become exactly what everyone feared. George shifted back to human form and crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands framing her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Look at me, Emily. Look at me." She did, though it cost her. "You defended yourself," he said, his voice rough but firm. "You protected us both. That's not something to be ashamed of. I killed him. He came here to kill you." George's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You did what you had to do. What you were meant to do. Your power isn't a curse, love. It's survival. Love." The endearment slipped out so naturally he might not have even noticed. But Emily noticed. Felt it sink into her chest and take root somewhere deep and vulnerable. Above them, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Emily tensed, but George didn't move, didn't even look up. A moment later, Astrid appeared, breathing hard, her armor splattered with blood that clearly wasn't hers. "We need to leave," she said without preamble. That was just the advance team. "There are at least 20 more surrounding the temple and reinforcements are coming." Her eyes flicked to the dead wolves, to Emily still kneeling on the ground wrapped in George's arms, to the scorch marks on the walls. Her expression didn't change. "Can she travel?" "She'll have to." George stood, pulling Emily up with him. His arms stayed locked around her waist, supporting most of her weight. "How many did we lose?" 2 guards. 3 injured but mobile. Astrid's joy tightened. "They knew we'd be here. Someone leaked our location." Which meant the conspiracy went deeper than a handful of assassins. Someone in George's inner circle was feeding information to his enemies. The Alpha King's expression went cold. "Deadly. Get everyone to the carriages. We head for the northern stronghold. No stops. No delays." And Astrid, he paused. "Find out who talked. I want a name before we reach the border." Astrid nodded and disappeared back up the stairs. George turned back to Emily, his features softening just slightly. "Can you walk?" She wanted to say yes. Wanted to prove she was strong enough to handle whatever came next. But her legs were trembling so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her. "I don't know," she admitted. Without a word, George swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing. "Then I'll carry you." It should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt safe. Emily let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her up the stairs, into the pre-dawn light, past the standing stones that had witnessed 14 other women face impossible choices. She'd just used her power for the first time. Just killed for the first time. Just discovered that breaking the curse required one of them to die. And somewhere out there, an army was gathering to make sure neither of them survived long enough to try. But for right now, in this moment, wrapped in George's arms with his heartbeat steady beneath her ear and the bond singing between them, Emily let herself feel something she hadn't felt since Torrin opened his mouth to reject her. Hope. Fragile and frightened and probably foolish. But real. The northern stronghold was exactly what it sounded like. A fortress carved from mountain stone, all sharp edges and defensive positions, built to withstand sieges that could last years. Gray walls rose from the cliffs like they'd grown there naturally, and guard towers dotted the perimeter at intervals precise enough to ensure no blind spots. It was cold, austere, completely impersonal, and the safest place in the kingdom. They'd arrived just after nightfall, having pushed the horses to their limits and beyond. Emily had drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey, her body still recovering from channeling power she didn't know how to control. Every time she woke, George was there, holding her, watching her, his presence constant and unwavering. Now she sat in a room high in the eastern tower, wrapped in furs that smelled like cedar and smoke, staring out a window at mountains that disappeared into darkness. She'd been given time to bathe, to eat, to change out of the ruined wedding dress. Someone had burned it, which felt appropriate, into soft leather pants and a tunic that actually fit. Her hair hung loose and damp down her back, and for the first time in what felt like days, she could breathe without her ribs aching. But she couldn't stop thinking about the codex. One of you must be willing to die for the other. The words played on repeat in her mind, tangling with images of silver flame and dead wolves and George's face when he'd said he wouldn't ask her to sacrifice herself. How were they supposed to break a curse when neither of them was willing to pay the price? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She didn't need to ask who it was. Could feel him through the bond before he even entered, his presence warm and solid and increasingly familiar. Come in. George stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He'd cleaned up too, his hair still wet, a fresh tunic replacing the blood-stained one he'd worn during the fight. But exhaustion lined his features, the kind that sleep wouldn't fix. The kind that came from carrying impossible burdens for too long. How are you feeling? He asked. Emily almost laughed. It was such a normal question. Such an inadequate one given everything that had happened. I don't know, she said honestly. Terrified. Overwhelmed. Angry. Confused. She paused. Grateful. That made him blink. Grateful that I'm not facing this alone. She pulled the furs tighter around her shoulders. That you're here. Something in his expression softened. He crossed the room slowly, like he was approaching something wild that might bolt if he moved too fast. When he reached the window seat where she was curled up, he hesitated. May I? She nodded. He sat down opposite her, close enough that their knees almost touched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was just heavy, weighted with all the things they hadn't said yet. All the truths they were still learning about each other. I need to tell you something, George said finally. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant in a way she hadn't heard from him before. About why I'm so certain we'll find another way. Why I refuse to accept that the Codex's solution is the only option. Emily waited. He took a breath, his hands clasping together between his knees. I had a sister, younger by 3 years. Mara. The name came out rough, like it hurt to say. She was brilliant. Kind. Everything I wasn't. Where I was serious and duty-bound, she was light and laughter. The entire court adored her. Past tense. Emily's chest tightened. When I was 26, the curse symptoms started appearing. The rage. The loss of control. The moments where I couldn't tell the difference between my thoughts and my wolf's. His jaw clenched. The court was terrified. Started whispering about succession, about what would happen when I inevitably went mad and had to be put down like my grandfather had been. He paused, and Emily reached out instinctively, her hand covering his. The touch seemed to steady him. Mara found a text. An obscure prophecy that suggested alpha madness could be temporarily held off by a willing sacrifice. Someone of alpha blood, given freely, could buy the afflicted king another decade of sanity. His voice went flat. Dead. She didn't tell me what she was planning. Just made sure I was away from the castle, busy with border negotiations, when she went to the temple alone and offered herself to the goddess. Horror crawled up Emily's spine. By the time I found out, by the time I got back, it was done. She'd slit her own throat on the altar. Bled out believing she was saving me. His eyes met Emily's, and the pain in them was unbearable. And it worked. The madness receded. I gained 10 years of stability. But the cost, his voice cracked. The cost was everything that mattered. Emily's vision blurred with tears. George. So when that codex says one of us has to die, when it demands sacrifice like it's simple, like it's noble, his hands tightened into fists. All I can see is Mara's blood on white stone. All I can hear is the sound I made when I found her. And I know with absolute certainty that I will not survive losing you the way I lost her. The madness would be a mercy compared to that. The raw honesty shattered something in Emily's chest. She'd thought his refusal to consider her death was about duty or prophecy or even the bond. But it wasn't. It was about a wound that had never healed. A loss that still bled. A sister who'd loved him enough to die for him and left him with survivor's guilt that had festered for years. Without thinking, Emily moved. Shifted from her side of the window seat to his, climbing into his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. He froze for a heartbeat, surprised. Then his arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. They stayed like that for a long time. Not speaking, just holding each other, letting the bond carry what words couldn't, grief and understanding and a growing affection that had nothing to do with prophecies and everything to do with two broken people finding unexpected solace in each other. Eventually, Emily pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. Hers were streaming freely. I'm not her, she said quietly. I'm not going to make decisions for you or sacrifice myself without your consent. But George, she cupped his face in her hands. We can't just ignore what the codex said. We have to at least consider it. No, you're being stubborn. I'm being realistic. His hands moved to her waist, holding her steady. You think I haven't spent the last 10 years studying every possible way to break this curse? You think I haven't consulted with priests and scholars and mystics? There has to be another answer. A loophole. Something. And if there isn't? Then we live with the curse. His voice was absolute. I'd rather have 5 years with you, really with you, building something real, than break it at the cost of your life. The declaration should have been romantic. Instead, it was frustrating. Because Emily could see the bigger picture that his grief was blinding him to. Could see that a king descending into madness wouldn't just affect him. It would destabilize the entire kingdom. Would lead to civil war, to territories fracturing, to thousands of deaths. His life, their bond, wasn't just personal. It was political. And sometimes, the needs of thousands outweighed the needs of two. But she didn't say that. Because tonight, in this moment, they both needed the comfort more than they needed the argument. So instead, she rested her forehead against his and simply breathed. His scent wrapped around her. His warmth seeped into her bones. The bond pulsed between them, steady and strong, a constant reminder that whatever else was broken in their lives, this connection was solid. Real. Worth fighting for. I see you, George whispered, echoing words he'd said before. All of you. The power you're afraid of. The grief you're carrying. The strength you don't think you have. His hands moved to her back, tracing slow circles. And I'm not afraid of what you'll become, Emily. I'm in awe of it. Her breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. His lips brushed her temple, gentle and reverent. I know you defended yourself today even though you were terrified. I know you didn't break when your own family rejected you. I know your wolf is fierce and your heart is kind and you're trying so damn hard to be strong when you have every right to fall apart. Tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. I killed someone today. You survived today. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. And that matters more than you know. The earnestness in his gaze undid her. Emily leaned in, closing the last few inches between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But George answered it with certainty. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers threading through her damp hair, and he deepened the kiss with a gentleness that made her heart ache. He tasted like pine and smoke and something uniquely him. The bond flared between them, singing with recognition and satisfaction and a rightness that made everything else fade away. This was what the mate bond was supposed to feel like. Not the cold emptiness she'd felt with Torin. Not duty or arrangement or expectation, but choice, connection. Two souls finding each other across impossible odds and deciding, against all reason, that they were worth the risk. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, George rested his forehead against hers again. We're going to survive this, he said quietly. Whatever comes. Whatever the prophecy demands. We'll find a way through it together. Emily wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that love, because that's what this was becoming, wasn't it? Would be enough to overcome curses and conspiracies and fate itself. But she'd seen too much in the past day to believe in fairy tales anymore. Still, she nodded. Because hope was all they had. And sometimes, hope was enough to keep you fighting even when the odds were impossible. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, full and bright and watching. Always watching. 3 days of peace. That's all they got. 3 days where Emily learned to control the silver flame enough that she could summon it without destroying everything around her. 3 days where she and George fell into a rhythm, training in the mornings, studying the Codex's cryptic passages in the afternoons, falling asleep tangled together at night while the bond hummed contentedly between them. 3 days where she almost let herself believe they might actually have a chance. Then Astrid found the traitor. Emily was in the courtyard when the commotion started, practicing her shifts under the watchful eye of one of George's veteran guards. She'd finally managed a full transformation. Her wolf form was smaller than she'd expected, sleek and silver white with those distinctive golden eyes, and was learning how to hold it for more than a few minutes at a time. The shouting came from the main hall. Her wolf's ears pricked forward, catching fragments of sound. George's voice, sharp with rage. Astrid's measured tones. And someone else. Someone pleading. Emily shifted back to human form, ignoring the wave of exhaustion that always followed and ran. The main hall was chaos. Guards lined the walls, their hands on their weapons, their expressions grim. George stood in the center of the room, his entire body vibrating with barely controlled fury. And kneeling before him, wrists bound in silver chains, was a man Emily recognized. Evander, George's chief advisor. The man who'd been with him for over a decade. Who'd helped orchestrate the search for the moon-blessed mate. Who'd been present for every strategic decision, every plan, every private conversation. Who'd sold them out. How long? George's voice was deadly quiet. More terrifying than if he'd been shouting. Evander's head was bowed, his shoulders shaking. 2 years. Since the spring before you started searching in earnest. A muscle twitched in George's jaw. Who? The Southern Coalition. Evander's voice cracked. They have my daughter, George. They took her 2 years ago and said if I didn't feed them information, they'd kill her. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. George's words could have cut glass. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bond was flooded with George's emotions, betrayal and rage and grief all tangled together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. It hurt. physically hurt to feel that much pain coursing through the connection. Astrid stood to the side, her expression carefully blank, but Emily could see the tension in her shoulders. The silver-haired warrior looked like she wanted to put her blade through Evander's throat and was barely restraining herself. "The attack at the temple," George said. "You told them we'd be there." "It wasn't a question." Evander nodded miserably. "They demanded to know your location. Said if I didn't comply, they'd send me pieces of my daughter." His voice broke completely. "I'm sorry. Gods, George, I'm so sorry. I never wanted. 2 of my guards died because of you." George's voice rose, the wolf in it making the words resonate unnaturally. "Emily almost died because of you. And you're asking for what? Forgiveness? Understanding? I'm asking for mercy." Evander finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Kill me if you must. I deserve it. But please, please help my daughter. She's innocent in this. Whatever I've done, she doesn't deserve to pay for it." The hall was silent. Emily watched George struggle with himself, watched duty and loyalty and compassion war across his features. Through the bond, she felt every spike of emotion. Felt him want to show mercy because Evander had been his friend, his advisor, someone he'd trusted with his life. Felt him want justice because betrayal of this magnitude couldn't go unpunished. Felt him want revenge because 2 good people were dead and it was Evander's fault. Before George could speak, the doors at the far end of the hall slammed open. A messenger stumbled in, breathing hard, his uniform splattered with mud and what looked like blood. "Your Majesty, the Southern Coalition, they've mobilized. 3,000 troops are marching toward the border. They're demanding you surrender the moon-blessed mate or face invasion." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of shock spreading through the assembled guards. Emily's blood went cold. 3,000 troops. An invasion. All because of her. George's expression went deadly calm. The kind of calm that preceded violence. "When did they cross into our territory?" "They haven't yet, sire. But scouts say they'll reach the border by tomorrow at dawn." The messenger hesitated. "They sent terms. They're willing to negotiate if you give them the girl." Every eye in the room turned to Emily. She felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure. Felt them calculating. Wondering. Asking themselves if one woman, one cursed, dangerous, barely trained woman, was worth going to war over. Some of their expressions said no. George's growl shook the rafters. "Get out." The messenger fled. The guards remained, but their gazes dropped, unwilling to meet their king's fury head-on. "Astrid." George's voice was clipped. Controlled. "Take Evander to the cells. We'll deal with him after we handle the coalition." Astrid moved forward, hauling Evander to his feet with efficiency born of decades of practice. The advisor didn't resist, just let himself be led away like a man walking to his own execution. Which he probably was. Once they were gone, George turned to his remaining guards. "I want full defensive positions by nightfall. Double the watch on all entrances. Send riders to our allied territories, call in every favor we're owed. If the coalition wants war, we'll give them war." The guards saluted and dispersed, moving with practiced urgency, leaving Emily and George alone in the vast hall. The silence stretched. Emily's throat was tight, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You should give me to them." George's head snapped toward her. "What?" 3,000 soldiers, George. "How many do we have here? 500? 6? She forced herself to hold his gaze. "You can't win against those odds. And if you fight, people will die. Good people. Your people. All because you won't hand over one woman. You're not one woman." He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You're my mate. My bonded. And I will burn the entire kingdom to ash before I let them take you." The possessiveness in his voice should have been frightening. Instead, it made her want to cry. "That's not a choice," she said quietly. "That's pride talking. You know this is the smart move. Give them what they want, negotiate for peace, and save your kingdom. They'll kill you. Probably." She tried to smile and failed. But at least thousands of others will live. George's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the fury burning in his eyes. Listen to me very carefully, Emily. I have sacrificed everything for this kingdom. My childhood. My freedom. My sister. I have bled and fought and nearly broken myself 100 times over for the good of these people. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. But I will not sacrifice you. I can't. The bond won't let me, and even if it would, I wouldn't choose it. So get that noble, self-sacrificing idea out of your head right now because it's not happening. You're being irrational. I'm being honest. His forehead pressed against hers. And I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Can you trust that I know what I'm doing? Emily wanted to believe he had some brilliant strategy that would save everyone and cost nothing. But she'd read enough of the Codex to know how these stories ended. Heroic last stands. Pyrrhic victories. Sacrifices that broke the survivors as thoroughly as defeat. Still, she nodded. Because what else could she do? George's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. Through the bond, she felt his relief, his determination. And underneath it all, a thread of fear he was trying desperately to hide. He was terrified, not of the coalition or the coming battle, but of losing her. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other while the weight of impossible choices pressed down from all sides. Then footsteps echoed through the hall. Astrid reappeared, moving fast, her face grim. We have a problem. George didn't release Emily. Another one? Evander wasn't the only traitor. Astrid's joy tightened. I found correspondence in his quarters. He's been coordinating with someone inside the stronghold. Someone higher up. Someone who's been feeding the coalition information about Emily's training, her abilities, her weaknesses. Ice flooded Emily's veins. Who? George's voice was dangerously soft. Astrid hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Tell me. Lord Cashin. The name hit like a physical blow. Cashin. George's cousin. His second in command. The man who would inherit the throne if George died without an heir. The man who'd been nothing but supportive and welcoming since Emily arrived. Who'd helped her navigate the stronghold's confusing layout and offered advice about controlling her power. Who'd apparently been working with their enemies the entire time. George's expression went blank. The kind of blank that came before someone either shut down completely or exploded into violence. Where is he? That's the other problem. Astrid's hands flexed at her sides. He's gone. Took 3 of his personal guards and disappeared sometime in the last hour. My guess? He's heading for the coalition camp to give them intel about our defenses in exchange for a place at the table when they carve up the kingdom. Betrayal upon betrayal upon betrayal. Emily felt George's emotions through the bond, felt the walls he was throwing up, the iron control he was forcing over himself to keep from shifting and tearing apart everything in reach. How many? His voice was ice and iron. Astrid understood the question. Loyal? Maybe 300. The rest are either compromised or we can't be certain of them. 300 against 3,000. Impossible odds. George released Emily and turned away, his hands clenching and unclenching as he stared at nothing. She could practically see him calculating, running through scenarios, looking for the strategy that would save them. But there wasn't one. Not unless he gave her up. Or unless she did what the Codex demanded and made the choice herself. One of you must be willing to die for the other. The words echoed in her mind, taking on new weight, new meaning. Maybe the sacrifice wasn't about breaking the curse. Maybe it was about saving the kingdom. Emily's hand moved to her chest, feeling the bond pulse beneath her palm. Feeling George's presence on the other side of it, solid and real and infinitely precious. She'd known him for 3 days. 72 hours. And somehow, in that impossibly short time, he'd become the most important person in her world. But 300 lives versus 1? A kingdom versus a woman? The math was simple. Even if the cost was unbearable. I'm going to get some air, Emily said quietly. George turned, suspicion flickering across his features. Emily, I just need to think. She forced a smile. I'll stay inside the walls. I promise. It was a lie. And from the way his eyes narrowed, he knew it. But before he could stop her, before he could use the bond or his authority or simple physical strength to keep her there, Emily ran. Out of the hall. Through the corridors. Up the stairs to the eastern tower where her room waited. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. But her resolve was solid. If giving herself up could stop a war, could save George's kingdom, and spare 300 loyal soldiers from certain death, then the choice was already made. She just had to be fast enough to make it before he stopped her. Emily grabbed a cloak, pulled it tight around her shoulders, and headed for the window. The drop was significant. But her wolf was stronger now. Faster. And the silver flame could cushion her landing if she timed it right. She climbed onto the sill, took a breath, and jumped. The fall should have killed her. 3 stories of sheer stone wall, nothing but rocks and hard-packed earth below. But Emily's wolf surged forward mid-drop, instinct taking over where training hadn't reached yet. The shift happened in heartbeats, bones reshaping, for sprouting, senses exploding into hyper-awareness. She hit the ground on 4 paws instead of 2 feet, the impact jarring but survivable. No time to celebrate. She could already feel George through the bond, feel the moment he realized she was gone, feel his fury and terror spike like a blade through her chest. He was coming. She had to move faster. Emily ran. Through the stronghold's outer courtyard, past the guards who shouted in confusion as a silver-white wolf they didn't recognize bolted toward the main gate. She was smaller in wolf form, faster, able to slip through gaps and shadows that would have stopped her human body. The gate was closed. Reinforced iron, designed to withstand battering rams. But the guards were scrambling to respond to alerts about an intruder, weren't watching the small postern door set into the wall for foot traffic. Emily shifted back to human, her hands trembling as she worked the bolt. It gave with a rusty shriek, and she was through, back into wolf form, running into the night before anyone could stop her. The bond screamed. George's rage and betrayal flooded through the connection, nearly driving her to her knees. He knew what she was doing. Knew she was heading toward the coalition camp. And he was absolutely losing his mind. She felt him shift. Felt his wolf take over. Felt him coming after her with a speed that would close the distance between them in minutes. Emily pushed harder. Her paws ate up ground, the forest blurring past on either side. She didn't know exactly where the coalition camp was, but she could smell them. 3,000 soldiers left a scent trail impossible to miss, sweat and steel and horses, and the particular combination of oils and smoke that marked the southern territories. She ran toward it. Toward surrender. Toward sacrifice. Toward the only choice that made sense even if it shattered her to make it. The camp appeared through the trees like a city of canvas and torchlight. Massive. Organized. Patrols moving in coordinated patterns that spoke of military discipline. Emily slowed, her wolf's instinct screaming at her to turn around, to run, to not walk willingly into the den of people who wanted her dead. But she shifted back to human and kept walking. Sentries spotted her immediately. Shouts went up. Guards converged, weapons drawn, their eyes going wide when they saw the gold flash in her gaze. "I'm here to negotiate," Emily said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Take me to your commander." They did. Roughly, with hands gripping her arms hard enough to bruise and blades pressed against her back. They marched her through the camp, past rows of tents and soldiers who stopped what they were doing to stare. Word spread like wildfire. The moon-blessed mate. She came to us. She surrendered. The command tent was larger than the others, marked with banners Emily didn't recognize. Inside, a man waited. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of flint and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. And standing next to him, looking smug and satisfied, was Cashin. George's cousin smiled at her. Well, this is easier than I expected. Emily's wolf snarled, pressing against her skin. You sold out your own family. I saved my family. Cashin's voice was smooth. Reasonable. George is cursed, girl. In 5 years, he'll be mad. In 10, he'll be dead. And you, he gestured dismissively. You're a weapon no one knows how to control. Binding you to him doesn't break the curse. It just makes both of you dangerous. So you decided to hand me over to them? Emily glanced at the silver-haired commander. What did they promise you? The throne. Stability. The commander's voice was deep-cultured. A kingdom not ruled by a madman or a cursed bond. Lord Cashin has agreed to take the throne peacefully. In exchange, we get you. To kill. To study. The commander's smile was cold. Your power is unprecedented. The things we could learn from you, the advances we could make in understanding moon magic, it's worth far more than your death. Which meant torture. Experimentation. A cage for the rest of her life while they dissected her abilities piece by piece. Emily's hands clenched into fists. The silver flame stirred beneath her skin, responding to her fear and anger. And if I refuse? You walked into our camp alone. Cashin's smile widened. You don't have the leverage to refuse. He was right. She'd made a terrible mistake. Come here thinking surrender would save lives, would buy peace, would give George a chance to survive without her. But she'd just handed herself over to people who would use her as a weapon against everything she was trying to protect. The bond pulsed, frantic and desperate. George was close. So close. She could feel him approaching the camp's perimeter, could feel his wolf tearing through anyone who tried to stop him. If he came here, if he tried to save her, they'd kill him. Or worse, capture him. Use him as leverage against her. Force her to cooperate by threatening the one person her wolf had claimed as theirs. Emily closed her eyes. She'd run out of choices, out of options, out of time. The only thing left was power. The Codex had warned her, told her the silver flame could save or destroy with equal ease, that her abilities were a weapon she didn't know how to wield. But desperate times called for desperate measures. And Emily was done being afraid of what she might become. Last chance, the commander said. Come quietly, or we take you by force. Emily opened her eyes. They blazed lunar gold, bright enough that several guards stepped back instinctively. No, she said quietly. I don't think I will. The power exploded. Not fire this time. Not flame. Pure light. Silver and blinding and all-consuming, it burst from her skin like a star-going supernova. The command tent disintegrated, canvas burning to ash in seconds. Guards screamed and scattered, their hands thrown up against the brightness. Emily stood at the center of it all, her body wreathed in power that hummed with the moon's song. The ground beneath her feet cracked. Grass withered and died. The air itself seemed to warp, bending around the sphere of her influence. And for the first time since her eyes had changed color, since the necklace had come off and her wolf had awakened, Emily felt fully in control. The power wasn't consuming her. She was wielding it. The commander staggered back, his face pale with shock and terror. Cashin had fallen to his knees, his hands pressed over his eyes. You want to study me? Emily's voice resonated with otherworldly harmonics, the wolf and the human and something else, something divine, speaking in unison. You want to cage me? Use me? Break me down into something you can understand and control. The light intensified. Soldiers were fleeing now, running for the camp's edges, abandoning weapons and posts in their desperation to escape. I am not your weapon. Each word carried the weight of divine mandate. I am not your sacrifice. I am not your solution or your problem or your anything. The bond flared brilliant and urgent. George burst through the tree line in full wolf form, massive and dark and burning with his own alpha power. He saw her wreathed in silver flame, standing in the ruins of the command tent with 3,000 soldiers fleeing in all directions and skidded to a halt. Their eyes met across the chaos. And Emily felt it. the final piece clicking into place. The bond wasn't just connection. It was completion. Two halves of a broken whole, finding each other and becoming something greater than either could be alone. George shifted to human, striding toward her through the carnage without hesitation. The silver light didn't burn him, didn't even slow him down. He walked into the heart of her power like he belonged there. Because he did. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. And the world exploded with moonlight. The curse shattered. Emily felt it break like chains snapping, like prison walls crumbling, like 300 years of divine punishment finally releasing its hold. The goddess's presence filled the space, vast and terrible and beautiful, confirming what the Codex had said. One of you must be willing to die for the other. Emily had been willing. Had walked into certain death to save George's kingdom. And George had been willing. Had chased her into enemy territory, ready to fight 3,000 soldiers if that's what it took to bring her home. They'd both chosen. Both sacrificed. Both proven their bond was worth more than their lives. And apparently, that was enough. The light faded gradually, gently, leaving Emily and George standing in a scorched circle, surrounded by devastation. The coalition army was scattered, broken, fleeing into the forest. Cashin was unconscious, his body slumped against a fallen tent pole. The commander was nowhere to be seen. George pulled Emily against his chest, his arms crushing her close, his face buried in her hair. "Don't ever do that again," he breathed against her ear. "Don't ever sacrifice yourself for me. Don't ever leave me like that." Emily's laugh was watery, half-sob. "You chased me into an enemy camp. You were ready to die fighting them. That's different." "How?" "Because I'm supposed to protect you." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "We protect each other. That's how this works now." Something in his expression cracked. And then he was kissing her. Desperate and relieved and consuming, pouring every ounce of emotion he couldn't verbalize into the connection of their lips. Emily kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his hair, her wolf singing triumph and joy and mine, mine, mine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the mountains. A new day, a new beginning, a curse finally broken. Astrid appeared at the edge of the clearing, leading what remained of George's guard. She took in the scene, the destruction, the fleeing army. Emily and George wrapped around each other and smiled. Actually smiled. It transformed her scarred face into something almost beautiful. "Well," she said dryly, "that's one way to handle negotiations." The aftermath was messy. The coalition army surrendered by noon, their commanders signing treaties that gave the kingdom everything George demanded and more. Cashin was tried for treason and exiled to the far territories, his claim to the throne stripped permanently. Evander's daughter was found, rescued from a compound on the southern border. He still faced punishment for his betrayal, but George showed mercy. House arrest instead of execution. A chance to rebuild his relationship with the child he'd tried so desperately to save. The kingdom began to heal. But Emily's story, their story, was far from over. Because breaking the curse had consequences no one had predicted. The bond between them had stabilized, yes. George's wolf was no longer fighting against madness. The royal line could continue. Peace was possible in ways it hadn't been for centuries. But Emily's power hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. The silver flame responded to her will now, controlled and precise. She could heal with a touch or burn with equal ease. Could shift faster than any wolf alive. Could sense threats before they materialized and hear the moon's guidance in her dreams. She was becoming something new. Something the prophecies hadn't fully explained. Not just a moon-blessed mate, but a conduit. A bridge between the mortal world and the divine. And there were others who'd noticed. Factions beyond the coalition. Ancient bloodlines that had stayed hidden for centuries. Enemies who saw her power as a threat and allies who saw it as salvation. The world was watching, waiting to see what Emily would become. waiting to see if she'd use her abilities to unite the territories or burn them all to ash. On the 7th night after the battle, Emily stood on the stronghold's highest tower, staring out at the kingdoms spread below. Lights dotted the darkness, villages and cities and outposts, each one filled with people whose lives had been changed by a woman they'd never met. By a girl who'd been rejected at the altar and claimed by a king. By a power no one understood. George found her there, as he always did. His arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Emily leaned back against him, letting his warmth seep into her bones. "That I have no idea what comes next. That I'm terrified I'll make the wrong choice and hurt people. That this power is." She trailed off, searching for words. "It's too much. Too big. I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry it." "You are." His certainty was absolute. "And you won't carry it alone. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together." The word had become her anchor, her promise, her hope. "Do you ever wonder," Emily said slowly, "if the goddess made a mistake? If she chose the wrong person?" "Every day." George's honesty made her smile despite everything. "But then I watch you stand in front of people who want to kill you and choose mercy. Watch you train until you collapse because you're determined to control your abilities instead of letting them control you. Watch you care about this kingdom and these people even though they rejected you first." He turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face. "And I know she chose exactly right." Emily's throat tightened. "I'm going to make mistakes. We both will. People are going to get hurt. Probably." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "But people are also going to be saved. Healed. Given chances they never would have had. Your power isn't just destruction, Emily. It's transformation. And transformation is always messy and painful and complicated." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that she could be the hero instead of the monster. But the line between the two was so much thinner than she'd ever imagined. In the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming. Emily could feel it in her bones, in her blood, in the way the bond thrummed with anticipation. Not a weather storm. Something bigger. Something that would test everything they'd built and every choice they'd made. The prophecy was complete. The curse was broken. But their story? Their story was just beginning. George pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Whatever's coming, we'll survive it." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you claimed me." He said it simply, repeating the words that had ended the Codex's instructions. "Your wolf didn't awaken because I saved you or bonded you or claimed you as mine. It awakened because you chose me. Because you walked into fire to protect my kingdom. Because you were willing to sacrifice everything, and that willingness, that choice, changed the game entirely." It was true. Emily had spent so long feeling powerless, feeling like her life was something that happened to her rather than something she controlled. But every major moment, leaving with George, removing the necklace, confronting the coalition, had been her choice. Her decision. Her power. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that she was destined to be extraordinary, but that she'd chosen to be. Chosen to fight instead of hide. Chosen to stand instead of run. Chosen to love a cursed king and break a 300-year-old prophecy because the alternative was unacceptable. The moon rose over the mountains, full and radiant and watching. Always watching. Emily felt the goddess's presence like a gentle hand on her shoulder. Approval. Acknowledgement. A sense that this was exactly what was meant to happen. Not because it was fated, but because she'd fought for it. She looked up at George, at this man who'd crashed into her wedding and claimed her in front of a kingdom, who'd shown her she was worth saving before she believed it herself, who'd stood beside her through every impossible moment and never once suggested she should be anything other than what she was. "I love you," she said. The words were simple, inadequate. They couldn't possibly contain everything she felt, the gratitude and trust and bone-deep certainty that he was hers and she was his, and whatever came next, they'd face it as one. But they were true. And that was enough. George's eyes went bright with emotion. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anything. More than the kingdom, or the crown, or my own life. His voice roughened. You terrify me and amaze me and make me believe in things I thought died with my sister. You're everything I didn't know I needed, Emily. And I will spend every day of whatever time we have proving that you made the right choice. She kissed him then. Soft and sweet and full of promise. The bond flared between them, warm and content and absolutely certain. This was right. They were right. And whatever storms were coming, whatever enemies emerged from the shadows or challenges rose to meet them, they would weather it together. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and distant forests and possibilities not yet realized. Emily pulled back just enough to look at George, to memorize this moment. His face in the moonlight. His eyes reflecting her own hope back at her. The way he held her like she was precious and powerful in equal measure. What happens now? She asked. George's smile was slow and genuine and utterly devastating. Now, we build something new. A kingdom where power doesn't mean cruelty. Where being different doesn't mean being dangerous. Where two people can stand together and change the world. It sounded impossible. Idealistic. Like a fairy tale that couldn't possibly survive contact with reality. But then again, 3 days ago Emily had been a rejected bride with no power and no hope. And now she was standing on top of a mountain, wrapped in the arms of a king, carrying enough power to reshape nations. If that wasn't proof that impossible things could happen, nothing was. Together, she whispered. Together, he agreed. And beneath them, the kingdom slept. Unaware that its future had just been rewritten by a woman who'd been told she was nothing. By a mate who'd been called cursed. By a bond that shouldn't have worked but did anyway. The story could have ended there. With love and victory and hope. But stories never really end, do they? They just pause. Take a breath. And transform into something new. Somewhere in the Southern Territories, ancient bloodlines were waking. Old powers were stirring. Enemies who'd stayed hidden for centuries were beginning to move, drawn by the scent of moon-blessed power and the promise of what it could give them. Somewhere in a forgotten temple, a second prophecy was being unearthed. One that spoke of the moon-blessed, mate not as the solution, but as the catalyst. The spark that would either unite all wolf clans under one banner or fracture them so completely they'd never recover. Somewhere in the darkness, forces were gathering. And Emily, powerful, terrified, determined Emily, stood at the center of it all. Chosen not by fate, but by her own courage. Claimed not by destiny, but by love. Ready to face whatever came next. Even if it destroyed her. Even if it saved them all. So tell me, would you have chosen her side? When the kingdom called her dangerous, when her own family rejected her, when every sign said she was too powerful to be trusted, would you have stood with her? Or would fear have made you one of the voices demanding she be controlled, contained, destroyed? Would you have seen the girl behind the gold eyes? Or just the weapon? Because that's the real question, isn't it? Not whether Emily was strong enough to survive her power, but whether the world was brave enough to let her try. She was never the villain in this story. Just a woman cursed with being extraordinary in a world that preferred ordinary. Just a girl who learned that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is claim your own power and refuse to apologize for it. Just a mate who chose love when fear would have been easier. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to change everything. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt her fear and his devotion and the impossible weight of choosing between safety and truth, then you need to subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we don't tell tales about perfect heroes and easy answers. We tell stories that burn. Stories about women who are too powerful, too dangerous, too much, and who save the world anyway. Stories about bonds that shouldn't work but do. About curses that become blessings. About ordinary girls who become extraordinary and refuse to shrink themselves to make others comfortable. Subscribe. Join us. And let's walk into the fire together. Because Emily's story? It's just the beginning. And you're going to want to see what happens next.